Greetings and salutations, everyone. I hope everyone is doing well today. Today, I have an assortment of terrifying Dogman encounters to share with you. Before we get into them, a couple links I'd like to share. As you know, I rely on Patreon, PayPal, and my merch to help the channel to continue to grow and go. The links to Patreon and PayPal are in the description below. My merch displayed directly under this video. Also, Dogman Frightening Encounters Volume 1, 2, and 3, the audiobook versions. They were written and researched by Tom Lyons, narrated and produced by me, Jeffrey Nadolny. Those audiobooks are available on Audible, Amazon, and iTunes, the links to which are also in the description as well. Now, everyone, I have taken far too much of your time. Let's get on with today's upload. Shall we? Today's first encounter. So I'm a Navy veteran. Now I'm a locomotive engineer for a major train company out of Louisiana. Late one night, I was going down the track with an older, seasoned conductor. Keep in mind that I was 27 years old at the time. I had only been on the railroad for a little over 2 years. I was going through an area that had a siding on the right-hand side of me. The siding is the area where you can park trains and do train meets at. It was very clear this night. The moon was pretty bright. Between the brightness of the moon and how bright the headlights of the locomotives were, I could see fairly a long way. My conductor and I were talking about coming into the next town and looking for drunks along the tracks, as they always hang out there, when all of a sudden he jumped up and said, "What the hell is that?" I looked up at the screen showing my speed and saw what looked like a very large dog crossing the tracks. From my point of view, it appeared to be around 4 feet tall at the shoulder, walking on all fours. I immediately set some air brakes and let off the throttle to slow the train down in case more creatures began crossing the track. I kept my bright flashlight in my back pocket when I had to inspect the engines prior to taking over the train. I retrieved the light and made it over toward the conductor's seat because he was opening the window. When we got to where we thought the creature had crossed, we both started scanning the tree line with our lights. Both of our flashlights landed on the creature at the same time. I nearly dropped my light when I saw this thing. Whatever this creature was, it was sitting, almost kneeling with a hand planted between its legs, almost ready to pounce. It had shoulders, like shoulders that were developed from lifting weights, pectoral muscles. Its midsection wasn't hairy either, but the chest and shoulders were. Imagine a lion's mane. The head looked like a German shepherd, but much bigger. The eyes were reflecting orange. I barely caught a glimpse of the hand wrapped around a small tree, but it looked like it had fingers like a man. It also had a tail that was short and very bushy. I had never seen anything like this before. I grew up living 20 miles from town, hunting and fishing in central Louisiana. I experienced primal fear that night, fear I've never experienced in my life. Every time I pass through that area of track, I keep my window shut and my eyes peeled for the creature from that warm summer night. Today's second encounter. Hello, my name is Caitlin. I grew up in a small town in Wisconsin. Growing up, my dad used to mention this backyard beast. He didn't tell me what it was, though, until I got to be about middle school aged. A little bit of background before I begin. My dad was hit by a drunk driver when I was 17 years old. The accident resulted in him losing his left leg and thus becoming wheelchair bound. He did still power through and worked a full-time job working third shift. Our house is built into a hill and is basically a connected top and bottom duplex that we share with my grandparents. My parents live in the bottom half. This bottom has a connected garage and patio doors on the side facing a patch of woods. I was only 2 when this happened, and I'm 22 years old now. This was told to my dad by my aunt. My uncle was a high school football coach, and my family would go to all the games. My aunt didn't know the area well, so she parked her car at my parents' house and got picked up by my uncle. After the game, my family went out to dinner, but my aunt wanted to go home, so my uncle dropped her off to her car. My dad and I were the only ones home at this time. My uncle pulls in the driveway, my aunt gets out. My uncle pulls out of the driveway right away and left. My aunt set her purse and whatnot down and got in her car. When she looked up, she saw this tall creature that she's described as features of a dogman / werewolf. It was looking in the patio door through the glass. She kept staring at it out of shock, and the creature turned around and noticed her. It started slowly walking toward her car. My aunt buried her head into the steering wheel out of fear and waited. After a while, she looked up and saw the creature walking back into the woods. She turned the car on and floored it and chased after my uncle. No one had cell phones at this time, so my aunt damn near run his car off the road. When he pulled over to confront her, she was hysterical and said, "There's a monster at your brother's house. It's going to kill him." She was basically screaming at him. My uncle calmed her down and convinced her to drive the rest of the way home. My aunt called my parents' landline and told my dad everything. He immediately goes outside to investigate, but nothing was there. We've never seen the creature since, but my dad said he always keeps an eye out during his drives home at night. Strange things have happened to us after that, but that was by far the scariest. Today's third Dogman encounter. My grandmother told this story a lot when we would go visit Butcher Hollow in Kentucky. We would go to the same house and land that she was on back then, and she'd always point up to the hill and say, "That's where Mother would say the Hat Pin Man would come." This would have been around the late and middle 50s. They lived in what I would call wooden shacks back then, and if you drive through the area now, it's still just as poor, with the homes still being these terrible wooden shacks. Most of the dirt roads would skirt the bottoms of the mountains and big hills, and was really the long way around when you could just walk over the small mountains to get to the other side. On one side of the small mountain was my grandmother Dimple's house. She was there between around 7 and 11 years old. On the other side was my Aunt Norrie's, Nora Butcher, shack house. Aunt Norrie had chickens, and my grandmother would go on errands for her mother and get eggs from Norrie. She was told not to go over the mountain, but she did anyway because she could pick and eat blackberries on the way, and at the top was a nice view. She'd stop and admire it for a bit. But the ground was always disturbed looking, and every now and then there would be a little wooden cross that would move from one spot to another, sometimes here and sometimes there. My grandmother's mom, Loretta Webb, finally caught her one time coming down the mountain, and she was livid. She yelled at my grandmother, Dimple, "I told you never to go that way. There's an evil thing up there, and an evil man, and I don't want you to go up that way." Grandma Webb made my grandmother clean the house, and when my grandfather Webb got home, he got her with his belt a few times. Grandma Webb told my grandmother the evil man was a doctor. They didn't really use birth control back then, and especially not in that area, and the doctor's wife was constantly pregnant, but they never had any kids. When a baby was born, the doctor would put a hat pin through the soft spot of its head. My grandmother Webb said they would bury it in the hill overlooking the view. Grandma guessed there was maybe 10 to 13 at that point. She didn't want my grandmother running into the man, and Grandpa Webb and Grandma Dimple's dad got old, and he told us what the evil thing was too. I call it a bunny monster. But as time has gone on, I started thinking that this was a dogman. He was horrified that my grandmother had gone where he had seen this thing. He had gone out to the outhouse a little bit up the hill. It was late at night and dark out. He came out, and darker than the rest of the dark, he saw a shape about 9 feet tall, standing there looking at him. It had long ears, hence the bunny monster, that stood straight up, pointy up on the head, and was on 2 feet, but slightly hunched over. Grandpa Webb picked up a huge rock and chucked it at this thing, calling it an SOB. It hit it. It hit the ground, and the beast didn't budge. My grandfather turned and ran to the house to get his gun, grabbed it, and ran back, but the thing was gone. Today's fourth Dogman encounter. About a year ago is when the first experience happened. It was just me and my grandmother at her house. We live in the city limits inside of a small town. My mother and dad went out hunting. I was in my room listening to music on my phone. At around 11 p.m., someone started knocking on the front door. Super weird, as we hardly have anyone come after 9. My grandmother was the first one to the door, and when she went to check, there was no one there. She opened the door for both of us to check. No one. We were a bit confused and figured it was some kids playing around. 1 in the morning comes around fairly quickly. I was in my chair and I had my headset on. I kept hearing scratching at something. I took my headset off and paused and listened, and it happened again. It was scratching the outside wall of my room. I was a bit worried to look out of the window, so I didn't rush to check. I had my phone ready and 911 dialed in before I felt comfortable to flash a light outside of my window. I didn't see anything, no prints or obvious signs of anything. So I closed my blinds and sat back down. I heard something run on the roof right above my room and to the front of the house and back down above my room, then run off to the front of the house. I was stunned and fight or flight was taking over. I reacted by locking the doors and moving whatever furniture by the door. My dad left his 308 in his room, so I grabbed that and posted it up in my grandmother's room with her until my parents came back. Whatever it was that ran on the roof had to be huge. We had roofers on our roof before, and even they didn't step or move on the roof that loud and that heavy. But whatever was running on the roof had to be heavy or powerful enough to hear and feel in the house. 2:30 in the morning, my parents came home. They pull in the driveway. I helped them inside, then moved everything back while I was telling them what happened. My mom didn't want to talk at first, while my dad looked pale and shaken up when I mentioned the scratching outside. We sat down and my mom spoke up that they were driving past the hydro power lines, and there was a large wolf-like creature darted past them and went behind a large rock. They thought they had clipped the creature and may have to help it put it down. But soon as they stopped the truck, my dad got out his gun. The wolf looked out from the rock and snarled back at them. It didn't look the same this time. It was evil to look at, and it was standing up this time, staring down at my dad. My dad squeezed off a shot and hit it in the chest. It crashed behind the rock after that. My dad worried for my mom, and he decided against seeing if it was finished. Got back in the truck and held down the gas all the way back to town until he got back home. What's weirded me out the most is whatever it was that resurfaced around town recently, and people are finding large wolf prints in their yards, and a neighbor said something was standing looking through their living room window about a month ago. Here's a brief Q&A with the person. Has anyone taken any photos of the creature, prints, scratches on the walls and doors? A woman who took pictures of the tracks had to close and take down her post on Facebook. I was still waiting on a message back from her on Messenger for what she thinks it was and the pictures, but me and my family got no hard evidence either, and it's the part that has us worried. If it ever wants to try anything one day and we call it in, and there's nothing to show that it's been around, whatever it is never leaves us anything, or we ain't as keen to track it well. The scratches I didn't notice were clawing on the wall, but like if it was running its hands on the and claws down the wall and walking up and down on the property doing so. Next question: how far from where your dad shot it to your house? My parents were an hour and a half away on the highway, 20 minutes from the highway to home, but they also said they stopped by my uncle's house quickly and told him not to go to the hunting spot in the morning, as he was supposed to meet up with them in the morning at the spot where they had originally planned to go. The time from when they shot at it, and my dad only guessed it was about 12 at night, as they didn't check or use their phones. They just wanted out of there before it gave chase. So the weird part was, it already knew where we lived and immediately came to bother me and my grandmother. That's the part that confused me because it came back before my parents did. Today's fifth encounter. Little context: I live in northwest Nevada, where the region is heavily populated with Native American. I believe I've had an encounter with a skinwalker and other bad, creepy things in the past, but recently, things have been a bit different. I've been on this land for about 2 years now, and it wasn't until very recently that I was no longer on the top of the food chain when the sun went down. The scales were tipped way further than normal. Last time I had an encounter was 5 years ago or so. Dropped off an ex at her house over the next hill range. Thought I was going crazy or seeing things because it looked like a coyote with really off proportions. When I tried to actually look at it, it was gone. Well, we got to her house and I noticed she was pretty uneasy. She told me she had seen the same thing. So I left her there, and that was about it until lately. It's mostly when I'm alone outside or I have my garage door open while I'm welding for circulation. Sometimes, even when I have multiple people with me. The acre I own is heavily covered in sagebrush and trees, so it's home to a lot of wildlife, and I do my best to accommodate them in ways that don't interrupt my day-to-day behavior. When it started, I thought it was the coyotes coming through the bushes and just multiple pair of eyes. One that made me feel off, but something was different. As the days went by, I noticed something was missing. It was the coyotes, or lack of them. We had fresh snow and zero tracks in the snow. Not even a scrappy bobcat, just the birds and rabbits. I began to realize that the feeling was getting worse. And I have to tell myself not to look hard into the brush. My wife refuses to go out after dark, and I won't go outside without my 5'7". I know it's useless, but I'm going to throw $50 of tracers at it, should it decide it's my time. The main reason it could be fouling me is my active lifestyle at night. I'm constantly building things at night, working out because I work all day long, and my neighbors all go to bed or lock their doors around 6, with the exception of letting their dogs out to do their business due to high traffic of natural predators in the area. I tried to borrow my child dog, a Great Pyrenees livestock dog, who is fantastic in sensing bad situations, and despite being potty trained, would refuse to leave the shop or house most nights. I had him at the house. He won't even go near the front door. He's about 170 pounds and used to throw with the coyotes that got cute with him over the 6-foot fence. I don't know what this thing is, and I don't know what it wants. All I know is I want peace. Today's sixth experience. I'm a wilderness survival instructor and security contractor. A couple days ago, a student of mine and good friend who I had taken out into the woods before told me his dad just got 150 acres of land in a secluded mountainous part of my state. It had a large amount of forest on it that hadn't been explored yet, as his dad was only building something for his horses that took up about 100 yards of the property, and his horses were free to roam at that moment. He said his dad got an insane deal on the property. My friend is now a dad of 3, and I know he doesn't get out into the woods that often, so I agreed to go with him because it seemed really fun, and I can imagine he needs a getaway every now and then. We are both indigenous, into cars, into wilderness survival, and all sorts of stuff, so we never run out of anything to talk about in the woods. His dad, however, told us that he didn't want anybody exploring the woods unless we had a gun. He said it was because he saw coyotes. Now, we're all indigenous here. We were raised in the same state. Coyotes don't actually attack people, really. My friend, who we'll call RC, also told me a while back when he was first at the property, he saw movement in the tree line that was roughly human-sized in shape, but couldn't really tell since his eyesight isn't that good. I brought my AR and a small flint napping kit just for fun of it, and we set off onto the property. We explored a lot of the rolling fields, creeks, multiple natural springs and ponds. Everything felt normal. It was a beautiful landscape. Eventually, we decided to get to the forested part of the property, as that had not been explored yet. As soon as we entered the tree line, the entire mood shifted. The forest had an ambiance of its own, very similar to woods in the movie The Ritual. The woods were gray, dead silent, save for the occasional creaking of a tall, tired cedar. There was a very small stream running through the center of it with sand that was black. It felt like we were surrounded, watched on all sides. It didn't take long before a very putrid stench hit our nostrils. It was the odor of rotten flesh, and we decided to follow the smell and found the remains of 3 or 4 cows. We examined the exposed skulls and couldn't find any bullet holes. It didn't appear to me that these cows had been put down. Something killed them, though, and their bones were spread over about 30 yards. There were large indentations in the dirt all around them that were very vague in shape. We decided to press on into the woods. Now we were accompanied only by silence, the putrid odor of death, and the sound of our own heartbeats. We kept stopping at the stream as I noticed several different types of track. Large coyote tracks, what I think were coyote tracks, and something else that was large, but intentionally avoided the sand, it seemed. We pressed on into the woods until we started to find trees that had been bent over and pinned behind other trees while they were still alive. Something that could never ever happen naturally. We hiked on and found what I can only describe as a tool made of bone lying on the ground. It was extremely crude, but looked like some kind of scoping tool or knife. It was disturbing because although it looked primitive, it looked way more primitive than a person would make, but an intentionally shaped tool nonetheless. We hiked on until we found a clearing with a pond that had a more large oval track surrounding it. On the other side of the pond, we found a very strange little tree structure. It was in an A-frame. It had rocks placed up against it. However, it wasn't that sturdy, and the rocks were very peculiarly placed. We found no signs of any campfire around it. We found no camping trash. This isn't exactly a place you could hike from a house. I had photographed and made a little video of the little hut thing. It was getting dark, so we decided we should head back I had a flashlight on my AR, but I didn't want to really rely on that in the dark with something that kills cows and makes tools out of their bones somewhere behind us. We made our way out of the forest and back to where the trucks were parked just in time before it got too dark to see. As we were leaving, we saw something on top of one of the hills that we couldn't identify, but didn't stick around to find out what it was. This is worth mentioning that the previous owner began construction on something on the property, abruptly halted the construction, and left. Again, we have no idea what this is. Today's final experience. This is an experience that I had happen when I was working at a summer camp in West Virginia. I'm not from West Virginia at the time. I didn't know anything about stories or experiences and things that happen in the woods here. I came to know about these things thanks to social media after leaving that summer job. At the time, I thought what happened to me was just my imagination or being vigilant about my surroundings. Maybe I can get some answers. For some context, the summer camp I worked at had employee campgrounds. We all slept in tents. Each tent had 2 people, and they were placed near a pond. My tent was near the tree line to a little piece of wood. You can see deer and bear every once in a while. I would constantly worry about having encounters with bears at night. That night, after having a few drinks with some coworkers at a local bar, I was pretty spooked about the campground. I didn't know why. It felt heavy to walk through to the tents. I went into the tent and got my toothbrush so I could get ready for bed. Walked to the restroom, washed my face, brushed my teeth. As I'm walking back to my tent, I dropped my toothbrush. Something made me look around. I felt like I was being watched. I looked and no one was outside. I noticed that no one was in the bathroom either. I didn't hear any crickets or nocturnal animals that you hear every night. It was silent. I picked up my toothbrush and kept walking to my tent. As I pulled the zipper, I felt this piercing stare come from the tree line. It felt dark, big, and heavy. I froze and looked straight at it. I couldn't see anything, but I know I locked eyes with it. My body just told me to get into the tent and close it up. When I got inside, I put all my things away and changed, got into my sleeping clothes. I still felt whatever that was staring at me was outside of the tent. The feeling was stronger, though. I decided to ignore it and go to bed. Later on that summer, I had a doe with twin fawns hanging in front of my tent. The doe was staring me down hard and didn't let me go out inside my tent. I looked for my friend at camp and we tried making her run off, but nothing made her budge. We decided to go out for dinner and we came back and the doe and her twins were in front of her tent, not letting us go inside. I also visited an old Civil War burial ground on the camp. The air was so heavy, no birds were chirping. There was an eerie silence, no living trees. The tree line was surrounded. The burial ground gave it a perfect circle. Nothing in that circle was alive or thriving. It felt horrible there. Didn't even know we got to the burial grounds. It felt like it. And I told my friends we must be here already because it feels like death. Sure enough, I looked down and see headstones. My experiences were very strange, but I enjoyed it, every bit of it. West Virginia is a magical place. Dang, there are some terrifying encounters. How about that one in Louisiana with the train guy? I'm trying to get him to come on and share that encounter. Actually, I'm going to try to get all these guys to come on and share these encounters with us. Um, just the train one reminded me of Mark's story, how the creature was not afraid of the tractor trailer. Well, obviously, this thing was not afraid of a train. Um, I don't know if it's because they are the apex predator of the woods that does not make them have fear or whatever. But whatever, it's terrifying. I mean, you're on a train and you see this huge canine thing. You're going to stop and look around, and this thing's still there looking at you. That just shows me that it's not afraid of people at all. Anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed today's upload as much as I enjoyed sharing it with you all. Please, everyone, practice kindness. May the Great Spirit watch over us all, and may He guide us down that path that we call life. Till later tonight, my friends. Till later tonight.